Have you ever paused to notice those women who walk through life alone, not in desperation, not in heartbreak, and not in search of anyone? Their solitude isn't a wound. It's a rebellion, not a retreat, but a return to themselves. These women have not been left behind. They've stepped away. From roles, from expectations, from a world that insists a woman's worth is measured by who stands beside her. In the stillness of their days, they meet their truest reflection. Not through applause, not through attention, but through the quiet strength of choosing their own company. They aren't broken, they're precise. They're not heartless. They simply stopped igniting flames for those who only ever came to bask, never to warm. There's something quietly radical about a woman who doesn't need anyone to complete her. It's not just rare, it's disruptive. Because it unravels a blueprint built on neediness, exposes how deep the illusion of dependence runs, and leaves those who still cling to it unsettled. Most men have no idea how to approach a woman who doesn't need saving, and many women are just now learning how powerful it feels to stop waiting. Jung once wrote that what we repress in ourselves becomes our shadow, and these women, living unapologetically alone, might just be the mirror of a collective shadow. They embody what many long for, but few dare to become. They don't announce their independence. They move quietly with it. They don't decorate themselves to be chosen. They disappear to be whole. And their refusal to chase love rattles a world obsessed with urgency. While everyone else rushes to be held, they've learned to hold themselves. A woman alone isn't missing out. She's tuned in to a different frequency. On this level, nothing is begged for. Presence is chosen. Approval becomes irrelevant. And maybe that's what makes her so provoking. She doesn't need to explain her silence, and yet it speaks volumes. She's not lacking love, she's defining it. And until she finds one that doesn't demand she become smaller, she will not bend. She stays rooted, unshaken. Enough. Maybe it doesn't make sense to you now. Maybe it feels like ego, fear, or pain playing dress up. But deep in the quiet part of you, there's a question that echoes in the background. What if her silence holds the kind of love we've forgotten to look for? The kind that begins within. Her silence isn't hollow, it's sacred. It's not a wall to keep others out, but a doorway to protect what she's found inside. And while others mistake that for distance or pride, they miss the truth. This space was carved not from bitterness, but from clarity. Jung also said, we project what we refuse to confront. Maybe that's why solitude scares us. It shows us what we've ignored in ourselves. But she, the woman who chose solitude, chose a different path. While others reach outward to fill their emptiness, she turned inward to face it. And in that quiet reckoning, she met her pain. Childhood echoes, invisible losses, counterfeit loves. Her solitude wasn't born from heartbreak. It bloomed from healing. She didn't give up on love. She stopped mistaking surrender for affection. This woman has danced with chaos. Not the kind you run from, but the kind you survive. She's poured herself into people until there was nothing left to give. She's held out her heart like an offering, only to be met with silence or scraps. But one day, maybe not all at once, she opened her eyes. And that awakening didn't come with lightning. It came with lessons. Little heartbreaks that stopped wounding and started reshaping. What stands before you now isn't indifference. It's growth. And growth, real growth, isn't gentle. It requires presence, honesty, and the kind of self-respect that no longer settles for less. She doesn't crave noise, she craves resonance. She doesn't fall for empty promises, she leans into presence that feels real. That's why she might seem distant to some. She doesn't want saving, she wants to be seen. And to truly see her, you'd have to go far deeper than most are willing to swim. That's where most stop. Not because she's hard to love, but because she no longer bends. To be loved. Wholeness is confronting. It awakens admiration in those searching for it, and fear in those still clinging to halves. She isn't waiting to complete anyone. She's waiting for someone who's already met themselves in the dark. Until that person arrives, she walks alone. Not in bitterness, but in deep allegiance to her own soul. She's not hiding, she's preserving. There's a world of difference between retreat and self-respect. But the world doesn't easily welcome a woman like her. A woman who doesn't believe her worth is tied to another person's presence. In a society still built on fairy tales that end in happily ever after, her solitude looks suspicious. Jung once said that where convention rules, truth struggles to breathe. And this woman? She doesn't live by tradition, she lives by truth. When she hears, "You're too much, you should settle." Nobody's perfect, she smiles. Not out of arrogance, but with a knowing calm. Because what the world calls too much is simply what she's learned she deserves. She isn't chasing perfection. She's searching for someone emotionally fluent, someone who's done the inner excavation she's already faced. And let's face it, that kind of soul doesn't just appear on every street corner. The discomfort she stirs has little to do with her words, and everything to do with her presence. She's living evidence that wholeness is possible without leaning on another. And that kind of truth, it strips illusions bare. Men who thrive on insecurity feel exposed. Women still caught in the web of approval feel seen in ways they're not ready for. But she's not here to challenge anyone. She simply is. And her being unapologetic, unchained, is a mirror. A silent, searing one. She's in no rush. She's not pressed by clocks or swayed by timelines. She honors her own rhythm, and that alone disturbs a world that feeds on urgency. While others race toward noise, she reaches for depth. While the world celebrates appearance, she waits for essence. While others pose for stories, she longs for something timeless. And when she says no, it's not manipulation, it's integrity. When she walks away, it's not theatrics, self-preservation. When she stays in, instead of settling for less, it's not pride, it's lucidity. A clarity shaped by pain, strengthened through surrender. And that clarity? It's her quiet revolution. She's not here to perform. She's here to exist fully, honestly, freely. And that simple, defiant act of just being? It's what makes her so radical in a world that profits off our disconnection from ourselves. Asterisk, asterisk. Maybe what unsettles the world most about her isn't that she's alone, but that she's at peace with it. Not a fragile peace, but one earned through fire. Carl Jung once said, "Those who look outside dream. Those who look inside awaken." And that's exactly what she did. She stopped chasing reflections and started facing her own shadow. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't poetic. It was raw. Stripping away the masks she'd worn for love. Confronting the dependency that once defined her worth. And slowly, patiently, she began to build herself, no longer through others' eyes, but through her own. And that, right there, shifted everything. How many times have you asked yourself whether being alone means you're failing or finally free? How many moments have you spent explaining your aloneness to those who mistake solitude for sadness? She's asked those questions too. Once, she saw her solitude as a flaw, a signal that something must be broken inside her. But then came the moment that changed everything. The day she realized it's better to walk alone than to vanish in someone else's shadow. That was the day she made a quiet vow to herself. No more accepting less than she knows in her bones. She's worth. Her path isn't neat. It's not a linear rise. There are dips into doubt, nights wrapped in silence, memories that sting when they visit. But in between all that, something else grows, a strength that's rooted in consciousness. She no longer craves the kind of love that cages or consumes. The love she seeks is light, expansive, honest. It doesn't diminish her to keep her close. It lifts her to stand beside her. And until such love arrives, she continues to grow not out of defiance, but out of integrity. She is the embodiment of what Jung called individuation. She went into the dark, cracked open, met her shadow, wandered through the mess, and emerged fuller than ever. She doesn't want a rescuer. She wants a witness. Not someone to complete her, but someone who knows the cost of becoming whole. That kind of connection demands emotional responsibility, and sadly, most still love from hunger, from fear, from need. She walks alone, not out of rejection, but because every step is filled with intention. Every boundary she holds is an act of reverence. Every silence she chooses is her way of remembering. Love should never be begged for. She no longer lives to prove herself. That calm, that grounded certainty, it radiates from within, and it unsettles those who rely on confusion to feel powerful. Because a woman who's met herself in the ruins can no longer be controlled. She's dangerous, not because she fights, but because she sees clearly. This woman you see, living alone, is not the girl who once pleaded to be loved. Something inside her broke, but it was in that fracture that she finally found her freedom. Sometimes it's the collapse that reveals who we truly are. Jung said that a tree's branches cannot reach to heaven unless its roots stretch into hell. And she has known both. She descended into her own depths, into the generational pain passed down like inheritance, into fears that didn't begin with her, but lived through her. And there, she began the work of breaking the cycle. She stopped playing healer. She stopped accepting crumbs wrapped in romantic promises. She stopped shrinking herself to fit relationships that only mirrored the same old wounds. And when she dared to say enough, the world tried to call her bitter, broken, wrong. But she held her ground, first trembling, then sure, then unshakable. Because once you've survived your own darkness, you no longer fear the absence of others. You become your own home. She has learned to be her own refuge. In the hush of her solitude, she's found a warmth no one else could give. She's not unreachable, just protected. No longer open to every passing presence, she guards her space with care. There's a sacred line between offering your heart and letting it be torn apart, and she knows it well now. She still opens, but only to truth, not to charm dressed up as connection. She's heard enough beautiful lies to tell when the words are hollow. Her intuition, sharp like a blade. Her energy, a filter that repels the inauthentic. If it lacks depth, she senses it before it arrives, and she turns away with ease. Her transformation didn't just happen on the surface. It's mythic, ancestral, rooted in something timeless. It's as if she unlocked a code buried deep in the feminine soul. Women weren't made to shrink into roles, but to rise into expression. Not shaped by others, but poured out in fullness. Something ancient awakened in her. A wild, wise, emotionally sovereign force. She is alone, yes, but far from adrift. She walks not beside a person, but beside her purpose. And no label cold, difficult, too much can cling to her anymore. She doesn't shrink to fit in. She expands to make room for her truth. She doesn't chase eyes. She becomes a light. She doesn't wait to be chosen, she chooses. And that's subtle. Reversal? It shatters the old rules. She's no longer available for control. She's already stepped through the threshold. And on the other side, she discovered a radical truth. The real relationship only begins once you've loved yourself enough not to need one. There's something almost holy in the way she carries herself. She doesn't perform for applause, doesn't thirst for praise. Her confidence doesn't shout, it hums, low and steady. And in that quiet, her true power rests. Carl Jung once said that what we face within becomes our destiny. And maybe that's why this woman, by choosing herself over and over again, has carved a path only she can walk. It's a path that confuses many, yet silently inspires even more. She doesn't patch her emptiness with promises. She doesn't hustle to prove her worth. She stopped asking to belong in places that can't hold her, because presence should be a welcome, not a negotiation. And if the welcome isn't honest, she doesn't argue, she simply walks. Not with anger, not with noise, but with the graceful detachment of someone who's been lost before and refuses to be lost again. What people rarely see is that she still longs for arms around her, for someone to meet her gaze and stay. She still hopes for love that feels like home, but not at the cost of disappearing. She's squeezed herself into boxes too small before, and each time something precious dimmed. Now she waits for spaces where she can bring all of herself undiluted, unmasked. And that kind of space, it demands more than romance. It calls for deep presence, for hearts that have wrestled with their shadows and still choose to open. She's not seeking fairy tales. She's seeking soul-to-soul connection. A bond built not on roles or rules, but on reverence. One where both can grow tall beside each other, without dimming, without contorting, without giving up their fire. And if that's too much, then so be it. She'd rather wait in truth than starve in almost love. Some call it arrogance. She knows it's love, the kind that starts with self and flows only where it's safe to bloom. We're witnessing the rise of a new kind of woman. Not new because she just emerged, but because she finally stopped hiding. This is the woman who turned her back on shallow attention and chose to dive deep. She grew tired of being wanted for the surface and began to crave something more respect. She didn't retreat from love. She simply redefined what love meant. Real love, she learned, should never require her to abandon herself. And once that truth settled into her bones, her entire world began to shift. She no longer needs to speak loudly to be heard. Her presence carries a quiet gravity that shifts the atmosphere the moment she enters a room. It's not magic, it's energy. The kind that comes from someone who's stared down their darkest nights and decided to return, not in pieces, but in peace. Not because she conquered all her fears, but because she stopped letting them rule her. Carl Jung might say she found wholeness not by cutting herself in half, but by weaving her contradictions into harmony. She doesn't turn her back on love, but she refuses to kneel for it. She won't shrink just to fit into someone else's idea of what love should be. She wants a love that makes room for all of her shadows and her light, her softness and her storms. Because she's tasted the kind of love that only wants the easy parts, and she's outgrown it. She knows that true connection embraces the bitter just as it does the sweet. She's far too whole to settle for fragments, far too alive to wither in cages labeled as care. And while this path can be painful, isolating, even misunderstood, she walks it still. Not because it's easy, but because it's honest. That's the journey of someone who's awakened trading comfort for truth, applause for authenticity. And that, deep down, is what unsettles the world. A woman who does not need. A woman who cannot be bent. A woman who won't be shaped into something more palatable. She is a quiet threat to systems that thrive on silent compliance. When she breaks the unspoken rules, those old scripts that claim a woman's worth, lies in her relationship status, she doesn't just free herself. She sends a ripple out to others. And that ripple? It's revolutionary. It's contagious. So she keeps going. Some days with heavy eyes, other days with fierce grace, but always grounded, always rooted in herself. Because she's discovered something unshakable. She's not truly alone, she's in her own company. And after everything she's survived, that is not a lack. It's a power. The love that arrives after that won't come to complete her. It'll come to celebrate her. The world will try to convince her she's wrong. that choosing solitude is a sign of bitterness, but she knows better. There's something quietly radiant growing inside her. Not ego, not rebellion, but a sacred kind of knowing. A wisdom that only comes from deep inner silence. The kind of wisdom Carl Jung described as individuation, the becoming of one's true self, free from masks, free from compromise. And when that kind of becoming takes place, no external voice can overpower the truth pulsing in her chest. She doesn't need to prove it. She shows it. In the way she gently closes the door when something no longer feels right. In the way she steps back, not with resentment, but with reverence for her own peace. In the way she smiles not for an audience, but because she's finally home within herself. Because she understands now, solitude is not exile, it's devotion. A vow to never again abandon her own soul. And when a woman reaches that depth, she no longer needs to fight, shrink, or plead. She simply is. And that is more than enough. The world will keep whispering that she's lacking something. It will keep placing distractions in her path manufactured. Love stories, glossy promises, polished masks in place of real connection. But she's already peeked behind the illusion. She knows now, it was never about finding someone else. It was always about never abandoning herself again. And once that truth settled into her soul, everything shifted. Desire turned into discernment. Emptiness transformed into sacred space. Waiting became a conscious journey instead of a punishment. What once pierced now teaches. What once caged now opens. You've felt it too, haven't you? That low hum inside, part ache, part awakening. Maybe it's an echo from the past, a moment you buried. A version of yourself you stopped listening to. Maybe it's the memory of a woman you admired. Or maybe it's the whisper of the woman you're becoming. Either way, something within you is stirring. Something that's done with the old shapes. Something that refuses to keep folding just to belong. And if you listen closely, that part of you is calling out not for approval, not for love, but for clarity. For a new way of being with yourself, with others, with life. The woman who walks alone isn't simply defying tradition. She's embodying liberation. She doesn't rush. She doesn't perform. She rebuilds on her own terms. Not because she wants to be different, but because she finally understands how precious it is to be whole. She doesn't walk ahead of others. She doesn't fall behind. She walks beside herself, steady and sovereign. And along the way, without trying to, she becomes a spark for others. A quiet beacon to those just beginning to awaken, showing them what's possible when we choose ourselves. If any part of this story touched something inside you, then maybe it's because you're ready too. Ready to step into a kind of love that doesn't start with someone else. It starts with self-trust, with silence that heals, with presence that grounds, with truth that doesn't ask permission. A love that doesn't plead to be chosen, but waits until it's met with equal reverence. And if that love hasn't arrived yet, maybe it's because your soul needed to meet you first. Maybe you had to become the kind of woman who no longer apologizes for expecting more. And if this message found you at just the right moment, if it stirred something you hadn't named in years, don't let it disappear. Let it ripple. Share it with someone who needs to remember who she is. Like this video. Leave a comment. Subscribe not out of routine, but because your voice matters here. Because when something reaches the soul, the most powerful thing we can do is keep it moving. Let it echo. Let it transform. Let it remind someone else you are not missing. You are becoming.